left, right.
All right, we are discussing the most recent Republican debate. So choose your favorite Republican. Let's see who wins. I think you'll like this episode if you are Republican or Democrat. So let me know in the comments who you think won this debate. This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
All right, we are live. This is SipTalk episode 226. Who is the best Republican? My name is Justin DiGiulio, joined by my colleague James, the Bosnator Boswell, philosopher, philanderer, philanthropist,
Philatelist.
Yeah, I'm out of PH words. Coming at you from SipTalk headquarters atop our sacred mountain, broadcasting from our sacred antenna. James, how's things hanging down there?
Things are pretty good down here. We finally had like 2 days where the humidity wasn't ridiculous, and it's gonna immediately start like tomorrow.
No,
but I went outside yesterday. It was like 88 or 89 degrees, but I was like, this is kind of nice.
We got the humidity up here, so look, we narrowly escaped a topic about OnlyFans today, and instead we're covering a recap of the Republican debate from last night. So both of them are really tough topics to talk about, really.
I think one's easier than the other.
I just did a little research.
I don't know how we get an hour out of OnlyFans. Well, I think most people average about 7 minutes.
I wanted to share some stats I just pulled up though prior to us deciding on this, because honestly I don't know too much about OnlyFans. I get the general gist of it, but I don't think anybody should be paying money for porn in the year 2023. Just my opinion. But
I mean, if you want to spend money on porn, then
there you go. But Rosh was saying that these women are making lots of money. So I just did a little search, and it said
only a select few are.
Most accounts take home less than $145 per month. The average is around 180. But most around 145. The top 10% of OnlyFans content creators make over $1,000 per month. So
still not living.
90% making less than $1,000 per month. The top 1% make more than $6,000, and the top 0.1% make over $100,000 per month.
Right. So if you're a 1 in 1,000 account, then you can make a living on it.
So the average subscription cost is $7.20, and the average account has 21 fans. So I think in order to be a real moneymaker, you either need to come to the table with a lot of followers or be able to create a lot of followers. However, I think the risk would be if you have an unsuccessful account, then you just kind of have this content that I guess you can maybe take it down. I don't know in that.
Yeah. As we know, it's easier to delete things from the internet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the internet doesn't store things, and people can't make copies of things. Thank God. Nope. So either way, that's the stats I wanted to include in the OnlyFans. I don't think we have an episode on it, but
I don't know. I'd say job done.
But I'm sure with some research we could go a lot further into that topic.
Like most things related to OnlyFans, we finished in record time.
So what we're gonna be doing tonight is we're going to be looking at the questions from the debate last night and seeing more or less, I guess, how we would answer them, or kind of.
Yeah, that's the idea.
I didn't watch the debate. I actually didn't even know the debate. I have been trying to avoid the news for the last couple of months because it just puts me in a bad mood listening to the news. So I've really been avoiding it. Been just listening to music, podcasts, audiobooks, and I get a little bit of the news through some podcasts, but I still even try to avoid those. So where do we start? Also, I'm trying not to drink so much, so I engaged a seltzer to drink along with a glass of scotch.
Is that scotch watered down at all?
No, by the end of the podcast, I'm a little toasty. I need to get a smaller bottle to be able to bring over here, but everything's in flux right now. All right, where do we start here?
We start with question 1.
Question 1. Hit me.
The song "Rich Men North of Richmond" is resonating with the country right now. Why do you think that is?
So, have you heard the song?
No, I have not.
How have you not heard the song?
Because I watched the debate.
I just, as soon as I saw that question, I typed the song into Google and I listened to it. It's borderline country music. I mean, it's very country music in my opinion, but it's not a bad song. I'm not a country music fan, but I will say it's not a bad song. It's from this artist called Oliver Anthony, who's a red-haired guy, and he gets mighty red in the face when he's singing. That was one thing that struck me during the song, but lyrically wasn't a bad song at all. Are you listening to it now and not listening to me? Because
No, I'm gonna look at the lyrics really quick. Speed run the song.
But it's about the struggle of the middle class, and one of the lines is how he's working overtime and getting taxed so much, which anybody who works overtime can tell you. A minor internet incident. This will cause some issues when I'm editing this episode, but let's get back to the question. Why is the song "Rich Men North of Richmond" resonating with the country right now? And this is a song by Oliver Anthony. So you just read through the lyrics of the song while we were offline.
Mm-hmm.
And what was your take home from this song?
My take home is that the government is disconnected from what the people actually want, and that the government is giving aid to people that don't need it and not giving aid to the people that do. Basically, the government's priorities are completely screwed up, and the people that live and work in Washington, D.C. are in something of a bubble where they can ignore the problems that they create or just ignore that problems exist and do whatever they want because they're rich and who cares?
Well, rich men north of Richmond. Richmond, Virginia is directly south of D.C. And, there's some lines in the song that really hit me. To me, it felt like the struggle of the middle class, which right now they need help. And the country really relies on the middle class. The middle class is the biggest tax base of the country, and it pays for all the social services that basically cover the poor people and people who are on welfare and things like that. He talks about welfare. He talks about working overtime and getting taxed effectively left, right, and center. And I was saying, I don't know if you caught any of this before we cut off. I was saying how anybody who works overtime looks at their check and realizes how much more tax is on their overtime work.
But that's not real.
In what sense? What do you mean it's not real?
Because
their paycheck is whether they're.
What I'm telling you is that, like, when you file your tax return, there's no difference between overtime wages and regular wages. So, like, if you have a higher percentage of your paycheck withheld because some of it was overtime, well, when you file your tax return, that just means that your refund is likely to be higher.
Potentially, but your paycheck week to week is lower. And that's, I think, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, that's really.
I mean, I could explain the intricacies of how this works if you'd like to hear.
I understand what you're getting at, but at the end of the day, the paycheck, and I'm sure you'd agree, is still lower.
The paycheck is going to be higher if you worked overtime than if you didn't work overtime. It's just a slightly higher percentage of your earnings will be withheld because your overall paycheck was larger, and so on that week or on that pay period, because you're making more money on that pay period, it's going to probably be withheld as though you're in a higher tax bracket than you actually are. So then when you go and file your tax return and you're in a lower tax bracket than that individual paycheck saw, then the portion that you overpaid in taxes gets refunded to you. So it's not like that money just goes away. It just means that you have to wait for it when you file your taxes.
Exactly. So week to week, your paychecks are, I mean, obviously you're making more in overtime, but if you count on the overtime, then that tax is really, really annoying. It also didn't feel so much like a political song. It didn't feel too right leaning. And I know this is a Republican national debate and it's probably resonating with a lot of Republicans. But it didn't feel that right leaning to me. And
Well, there was one part about it that felt a little right leaning, but it's something that I think people on the left could understand
which was
or
what?
should understand, where he talks about how, like, if you're obese and you're getting food stamps, or
Yeah.
like if you're on welfare and you're like, welfare shouldn't be paying for your fudge.
Well, he talked about there's starving people in the streets and there's obese people milking the welfare system, and that's, and we'll get further down the line with these questions from the debate last night about all these kind of holes in the system and loopholes in the system and issues with government. Should we hit the next song?
Someone says I'm more disconnected from the public than the government. That may be true, but my job is not to be connected to the public.
Well, and I think that's what, when we have disagreements in this conversation, a lot of times I think I'm echoing from the people that I see every day and what I see on social media, and I think the big disconnect is I interact with a lot more people on a regular basis. So, when I tell you,
it's probably a safe bet that you interact with more people in 2 days than I do in a month.
I would probably agree with that. You know what? I'd argue probably one day.
I think it would be close with 1 day, but it would be somewhere between 1 and 2 days that you would break through.
I mean, there's sometimes by 2:00 in the afternoon, I've texted more than 50 people, like not 50 texts, but like 50 different people. So just
before I was playing in the pool leagues and going to a bar once a week, and like then like the one day would
deeper.
What?
You're digging yourself deeper, I feel like.
No, I'm saying that, like, by the fact that I'm going to a bar once a week to play in pool league, that's what
That's
might
what
bring me over the 1 day.
So, fuck, I totally lost my train of thought. Oh, but that's when I'm telling you, like the working overtime and then, getting taxed higher, that a lot of people work overtime. And for a lot of people, that really fucking stings. It's like people who work a salary job and then get commission, and their commissions get taxed really hard.
I mean, I see that. I get a bonus every once in a while on my check for gain on sale on our mortgages. And when I do, like, my paycheck is not appreciably higher, even though the bonus is there, because, like, I get taxed a lot more on that bonus because it kicks me into a different tax bracket for withholding purposes on that paycheck.
Now, imagine if that bonus wasn't just for a mortgage, but it was for 6 additional hours of work.
It's the same thing.
Well, I mean, are you putting either way? We got to get to the next question. I don't know what it takes to do a mortgage, so that's not.
Well, you work in real estate. You really should.
I sort of do. All right, question 2. What steps should be taken to reduce the size of government?
So, I think the first thing we need to do is reduce the amount of money that we're spending on the military. Like, that's our single biggest elective expense. Because, like, Social Security and Medicare are the biggest expenses, but those we're kind of tied to. There's not a ton that we can do to reduce the spending on those. There's little things here and there, but, like, we spend a ridiculous amount on the military. And ask anybody who has worked in the military and say, how much did the military waste that you saw? And they will give you an earful in terms of, like, requisitioning things that they didn't need because they knew that if they didn't, then their budget was going to go down the next year. And so, like, and overpaying for things because of kickbacks with contractors and whatnot. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of fraud and waste in the military that can be eliminated. I think that
Look,
there's a
hold on.
lot.
On that note, though, I don't think it's just the military. I think there's a lot of fraud and waste and bullshit bureaucracy that happens everywhere. And
Okay,
I think what we don't have is we don't have anybody really looking at these programs and potentially just redesigning them from the ground up. We just spend more money to make the program better, and that money just goes awash as well.
okay, but hear me out. Is if we accept, I'm going to make up a number here. This is not representative of what the reality is, but let's say that 10% of the military budget is fraud and waste, right? And let's say that that 10% is also the same in the Social Security Administration or the FDA or the Department of Agriculture. Name a department, right? And let's just say that 10%, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a military budget that's close to $1 trillion or a Department of Education budget that's maybe 75 billion, then if you can tackle the waste and fraud in the biggest categories, then you're going to be making more of an impact than by trying to take the it would probably take as much, or it would probably take about the same amount of work to deal with waste and fraud in the smaller departments, but you're going to get much less for it. So
So
go for the biggest fish first.
I I agree with you that the government spends money recklessly, especially in the military. I think the issue isn't so much how much money we spend, but how poorly we spend it. But the question is, what steps should be taken to reduce the size of the government?
Well,
And
that's
to me,
reducing the size. If we can reduce the size of our military, like our military is way bigger than we need it to be. And I'm not saying eliminate the military. It's necessary. I'm saying reduce it. So
well,
that's a big impact on the size of government is reducing the
but
size of the
what,
military.
what I'm saying is we need to be taking a lot of our expenditures and be looking at the systems. And I think we need to be rebuilding these systems from the ground up rather than putting more money into them to fix them. So, or just trying to fix the system as it is. So, when you take the defense spending, Rosh is saying it's $816 billion for the
Yep.
Department of Defense, which is almost $1 trillion, which, I mean, it really isn't. It's almost $200 billion away from $1 trillion, but it looks awfully close. Um, I don't think we're getting. I think that money is literally just being washed down the drain, and the drain just being the pockets of super wealthy people who are already super wealthy. So again, we just have no idea really where that money is going. So,
But
I,
in the military, in some audits, has also said we have no idea where that money
well, I
went.
mean, if the audit is running dry, that really says a lot because anybody who's really engaging in an audit is probably someone who loves auditing, and it's probably someone who thinks like you do, and is not going to accept we don't know where it went for an answer.
When I worked at the firm, when I worked at the accounting firm, I was in an auditing training meeting with two of the partners, right? And one of them was talking about going to a conference on auditing. And he was talking, he's like, and he's an auditor. But he was talking about like the kinds of people that go to auditing conferences. And he's just like, I've never been in a room with a bigger group of nerds.
No shit.
And this is a guy who is good at auditing and knows his stuff, but like, I think deep down doesn't have the personality of an auditor in the way that you think of
Well,
auditors.
I think auditing, might be a good way to reduce the size of the government. Is really having a lot more transparency and understanding where money is being spent in the government and what's being truly wasted.
Yeah,
Let's hit the next question here.
fire away.
Polls consistently show that young people's number one issue is climate change. How would you, as both president of the United States and leader of the Republican Party, calm their fears that the Republican Party doesn't care about climate change? Yes, James, how would you, as president of the United States and head of the Republican Party, um,
I copied and pasted that one directly from the debate transcript. But the
I'm,
question is, how do you handle climate change?
so as a Republican leader,
I would say as a leader, because it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. The climate doesn't care.
yeah, let me.
I mean, it's really simple. Is you implement a carbon tax where industries that are carbon intensive have to start paying for the carbon that they emit. In economics, carbon emissions are what are classified as an externality. Do you know what that is?
I'm sorry, say that again. I'm just doing a little research here on the right.
Do you know what the word externality means in the field of economics?
Lay it on me.
Basically, it's a negative impact from operating your business. And here's an example. Let's say you run a chemical plant, right? And the chemical plant happens to like periodically leak chemicals into the soil, and some of that gets into the groundwater, right? Now, if the chemical plant isn't fined or forced to clean up this mess that they create by operating, then, well, somebody's going to have to pay for that. Either the community pays for it in the negative health effects that it has, and having to go to the doctor and pay for like cancer treatments and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
or somebody has to pay for cleaning up the rivers and the groundwater and getting the chemicals out. And so, if the chemical plant isn't forced to pay for this, then they're basically able to profit off of the fact that they're not responsible for the negative externalities that they create. So you can charge for externalities, and carbon tax is one of the ways to do that. And so
you have to be able to quantify it, and we've actually gotten pretty good at quantifying carbon.
You can, right? Because like if you're running a factory that runs heavy machinery that creates a lot of carbon and stuff, like right now that's not really taxed. The only way that that's taxed is indirectly. Of like if you have to buy fuel or something, then there's the excise tax on fuel that you pay for. But
okay,
like,
so let me just wrap it up. You got a way of saying things quite long wordedly.
I want to make sure that people understand what I'm talking about.
The problem is sometimes let me just paraphrase. You would you'd place a carbon tax on businesses only.
I'd place a universal carbon tax, and the thing is, like, it's going to be borne primarily by businesses, because businesses are the most responsible for carbon emissions. Like, yes, you and I are responsible for carbon emissions, but like business carbon emissions dwarf consumer carbon emissions.
Obviously.
So make everybody pay for it, but make everybody pay for it in proportion to how much they produce.
I mean, the argument against that is that the cost of goods is going to continue to go up.
Yeah, that's fine. It has to, because again,
but
if we don't pay for it now, we're going to pay for it more later. By not addressing the externality today, it's going to cost us way more in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the ultimate argument as well. That cost of goods can go up, or just we can continue to kill the earth. But there were some Republicans completely denying climate change altogether, calling it a climate change hoax.
Yeah, Ramaswamy, who is an utter clown.
That's kind of what
the only thing that I took away from the debate that I would consider a positive was how it seemed like everybody on stage hated Vivek. And they weren't even nice about it. They just they made it very clear that they could not stand this guy, and I loved it.
I mean, I knew nothing about any of the candidates. I did not watch the debate. I watched a little recap today.
He's a sleazy con man.
I mean, he didn't look very presidential. I was looking at these guys saying, "Yeah, who looks presidential? Who sounds presidential?" Not him. All right, let's hit question number 4 here. I'll let you read.
Oh, you didn't answer question number the third one. How do you deal with climate change?
How do you deal with climate change? Well, I liked your answer, by the way. You just ran right into the answer. I hadn't even thought about an answer. Yeah, carbon tax is a good one. I think we just really, I think also to be working with industrialized countries that we rely on to produce a lot of our goods, specifically India and China.
Yeah, and that was actually mentioned in the debate correctly.
I missed that. All right, but I think we we outsource a lot of this, so we can get away without paying that much carbon tax. Should there be a carbon tax? And I think we'd see a lot more businesses leave the U.S. if we imposed a carbon tax only here.
True.
They'd go to places like India and China.
Right, and that's just shifting the externality outside of our borders. The externality still exists,
But that's
and
why
the problem.
that's why I'm saying we would need to work with these other countries as well to come up with a solution that works for everybody.
Here's a good analogy. Like, if we stop emitting so much carbon, but we just move those industries to India and China that are going to just emit as much or more carbon,
Probably
it's
more.
like having a no smoking section in a restaurant. You sit on one side of the restaurant and you sit in the no smoking side. The smoking side you can still smell.
Yeah, it doesn't smell as bad though.
It doesn't smell as bad, but like a no smoking section in a restaurant is like a no peeing section in a pool.
All right, next question, number 4. How do you say to your party and to your state, which today confirmed a 6-week abortion law as well, especially the impact on women? I must have read this question
This
wrong.
was a question that was posed to Nikki Haley, basically saying, what is your stance on abortion, and what do you tell women about that?
Yeah, and apparently that day they confirmed a 6-week abortion law.
Yep. Yeah, the Supreme Court in South Carolina allowed a 6-week abortion law to go into effect.
Which a reminder, 6 weeks into being pregnant is not a very long time whatsoever.
Best case scenario, you're going to know for about a week and a half before the time runs out.
Yeah. So this is a difficult question for you or I to answer, but I think the question is, as a Republican, as a member of the Republican Party, how do you deal with abortion law?
Well, I'm not going to answer as a Republican. I'm going to answer as myself, and I'm going to say, let the medical community determine how to deal with this, and stop with these laws that interfere between people and their doctors.
So I'm going to take a slightly more centrist approach to it and say, why don't we put the laws up to a vote? So right now most of the abortion laws are not being voted on. What's happened is our politicians who we voted into office are making the laws. We're not actually putting these laws on the ballot. And most people don't support banning abortion.
You know what happens when these laws get put up on to like a general election vote?
They don't go into place.
People support abortion rights.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the case. So again, I'm taking a more centrist approach than you are, but
I don't even think mine is all that extreme. Of how about we let doctors who spent their entire lives learning about this shit? How about we let them decide?
well, that's more left leaning, James.
Oh yeah, because we trust expertise.
Next question. I'll let you read this one because I'm reading all these here, and you typed them.
All right. And this is related to crime increases in cities. How much of what we're seeing happening around this country with crime in the cities is a result of the COVID lockdowns? And this was asked to Mike Pence. So it says, was your administration like partially to blame for how we got here? So I want to kind of rephrase the question a little bit to make it easier for us to talk about, which is, why are we seeing increases in crime in cities? What is going on in American cities right now, and how do we fix it?
Well, let's just go back to the question being about coronavirus lockdowns and what effect they had on homelessness. So I can tell you from someone who spends a lot of time around not just homelessness, but mentally unstable people who are using drugs, people in tents out in the street, people passed out on the street that literally looked like they're dead. Actually, there was somebody that was on the sidewalk for like 20 hours the other day that was actually completely dead for 20 hours, and people just walked by them. Give or take a couple of hours, but it was all day long. I don't actually think the lockdowns had that much to do with the drug addiction and the homelessness. I think it drew more attention to it, but it was always there. I don't think it's necessarily the lockdowns like made people homeless. It made people more addicted to drugs. I just think that we saw more of them in the streets. I noticed right off the bat, and it seemed to me that because there was less people walking up and down the streets, and the biggest thing, about being homeless is you sit in the streets. And it's really difficult to sit in the streets when people are like, will basically kick you in the face because you're on the middle of the sidewalk.
Well, it's also like, let's say in a given block you have 10 homeless people, right?
Well, but imagine you have 140,000 people that walk down that block every day.
Right. So this is where I'm going. Is like if you've got 10 homeless people and there are constantly 200 people walking up and down the block, you don't see those homeless people very much. If there's 2 people walking up and down that block, then you see 2 walkers and 10 homeless people.
But it also allows another 10 homeless people to camp out there too, because it's a safer place for them to stay. So I don't think necessarily coronavirus lockdowns impacted the homeless and drug addiction population so much. I think it just exacerbated a problem that we already have, and that's that we don't have mental health facilities, and our social welfare systems are not psychiatric hospitals, and that's how we're using them right now. And our hospitals are also not psychiatric hospitals, nor are our jails. So these people aren't getting treated for their actual drug addictions and for their psychiatric issues, and that's why a lot of them are homeless. The face of homelessness is not Sally, mother of 2, who's bum on her luck because she lost her job at the factory. She's not the face of homelessness. I'm not saying there aren't instances of people like Sally. The vast majority of the homeless people that you see, and when you call it face, it's because that's what you see, are the mentally ill and the drug addicted population. And we need to be actually dealing with those. I don't think the lockdowns had anything to do with that. I didn't support the lockdowns, by the way, but I don't think it caused this issue that we have right now.
I'm going to say that I think the lockdowns had a small impact on it, because you have, like, if you think about where in cities do homeless people tend to spend most of their time?
The busier touristic areas?
No. Like, they might go to, like, the more traveled areas during the day to panhandle, but, like, they spend most of their time in areas where they're not going to be bothered. Because why would they want to, like, so they're not going to want to be in an area that has a high police presence. They're not going to want to be in an area that has a high people presence. Because
homeless people in New York City don't seem to worry about police too much. Police don't seem to worry about them too much. I got a 2-point violation on my license for turning around on a one-way street.
Yeah, I know. We've
when
heard
I was
this
being
story.
attacked by a homeless person. So,
But,
well, I don't know where you're going with this.
Where I'm going with this is, like, having spent time in Sacramento, California, that has a really bad homelessness problem, and having spent time in New York City, and Charleston has a homelessness problem, and San Diego has a homelessness problem. Charleston probably the least of all of them, but Charleston, it's definitely here.
All right.
And so my point is that homeless people tend to, like, try and find places to set up their camps where it's not super high traffic areas, because it's their camp, so to speak, is less likely to get disrupted the farther away they are from where non-homeless people spend their time. And so when the lockdowns happened, it basically turned the entire city into an area that a homeless person could feel safe, because nobody was going anywhere. So instead of camping on the edges of town, why not camp in the middle where it's easier to get to things? And by the way, the police aren't really out, nobody's really out, so no one's going to bother me if I camp in a place that I wasn't able to camp before.
Okay, so where are you going with this? How did the lockdowns affect the homeless?
The lockdowns affected it by increasing the parts of the city that a homeless person would be comfortable camping in. You can think about it as just like it allowed homeless infiltration into the centers of cities.
So I don't necessarily agree with that. We don't really have an outside or city limits of New York City. Most of the coastline of the city is pretty populated, big buildings. And then uptown in the Harlem area, there's really not any homeless people up there. It's mostly the Midtown area.
So New York's different though, but I'm telling you, having observed the way homeless people behave and organize and live their lives in other cities, I think New York is kind of different than a lot of other major cities. Where in Charleston, in Sacramento, and San Diego, yes, you'll find homeless people practically anywhere, but where do they group and congregate? And it's not in the centers of cities.
New York is definitely different in that respect. Question number 6. If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? And they actually asked for a show of hands. And
Yeah,
only
and you
2
should
of them
watch the
didn't raise
video
their
of it
hand. Yeah.
because like half the stage is looking at the other half of the stage to see what they're going to do.
But all but 2 raised their hand saying that they would support him as the party's choice, even though they are his direct competitors.
Yeah, the only 2 that didn't raise their hands were Asa Hutchinson and Chris Christie.
Chris Christie, yeah. So obviously you and I would not support him, whether he's convicted or not in the court of law. Do you know also, though, last night, even though he wasn't part of this debate, he did do a Tucker Carlson one-on-one interview?
Yeah, I watched the debate, and like that's as masochistic as I was willing to go. I couldn't bring myself to watch Trump and Tucker Carlson go back and forth for an hour.
But I guarantee it was better for him to be talking with Tucker Carlson than it would have been for him to be on that stage. So, because he just would have been being attacked by everybody else. So, well played by him last night.
Well, yeah, I think him skipping the debate was a smart move. And I actually want to share a theory that I have on Trump. But
Go ahead.
like it was a smart move because he really didn't have anything to gain from going to the debate, but he had a lot to lose. So, but I have a theory on Trump because like I've said this a number of times and I'll say it again. I think Trump is a profoundly stupid person. But he has certain skills. He like I think he's quite good at reading a room. He's quite good at reading social situations, and he's developed a certain charisma to him that makes him interesting to watch, right?
Sure.
And so I put these 2 together. So many years ago when I was a substitute teacher, there was one year where I was teaching in one room, and I started off the year day 1. They're like, "We need you to sub this." I was like, "This is not a good situation. If you're asking me to sub for a room day 1." But the room next to mine was kind of like the partner room with mine. It was a special education setting, and I was running one room, and the other room had a brand new teacher in it, who I thought was pretty cute.
All right.
And so
you got 30 seconds left. Go ahead.
Anyways, her and I were kind of like we went on a few dates, but nothing ever happened. Like it fizzled out. But we had some chemistry and we got along well.
So
while
you were dating the special ed student.
Yeah, the student.
Sorry, hit it. Go ahead.
And so while we were in school, the 2 of us were professional with each other because why wouldn't we be? But what I noticed was that the kids in the classroom asked if we were dating, and we had done nothing to give any indication that there was anything going on between the 2 of us. But I think that they were able to pick up that there was some chemistry between the 2 of us. And my theory is that for kids that are lower on the intelligence spectrum, one of the ways that they've adapted to the world is getting better at reading social situations. Because if they can't think their way through something, they learn to watch what smart people do and do that. And so I thought that the kids had a very high social intelligence because they were able to pick up on something that the 2 of us were absolutely not trying to broadcast. And so I think Trump is an example of that. He's an incredibly stupid person, and the way he's made up for his lack of intelligence has been through reading social situations and finding ways to navigate through them expertly.
Yeah, I will buy that. I have in my head thought, man, this guy is either really fucking dumb or really fucking brilliant. But I can't justify in any of his actions that he's that brilliant. He just always ends up on top for the most part. And he's been through a lot of shit, so I don't know how he just continues to. Maybe it's because of his BMI. He just floats to the top. I don't know. But he does pretty well, which always makes you think in the back of your mind, he must have accounted for this and that. He must have been playing chess, and he must have had the forethought. But I don't think that's possible. On to the next question.
I like my theory.
I mean, it's an interesting theory. I don't necessarily know that gets you that far. Again, which is why I think maybe there's some sheer brilliance to this guy.
No,
next
I'm not
question.
giving him that credit.
The administration is now asking Congress for a 24 billion more, regardless of the specifics of the plan. Is there anyone on the stage that? Oh, so this is for Ukraine. Is there anyone on the stage who would not support the increase in funding for the Ukraine? So, Congress is now offering 24 billion, regardless of what it's for, to Ukraine. Would anyone not support that?
Yeah, and largely the question is, do you support aid to Ukraine? And if so, is there a limit?
I mean, to me, it just feels like now we are fighting a war with Russia via Ukraine, and we're trying to stay out of it by just funding them.
Well, that's pretty much what it is.
It's exactly what it is, and I
don't have a problem with it. I think that's money well spent.
Well, not having specifics of what's happening with that money, I think, is very irresponsible. And we're getting one version of what's going on between Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, this is a Fox News host phrasing the question. So, how much of that 24 billion is for nebulous things? Who knows? Like, it could actually be that it's well accounted for. We don't really know. That's their messaging. My view is, as long as we know what the $24 billion is going for, this many guns, this many missiles, whatever, then we should be sending as much weaponry and machinery and whatnot to Ukraine as possible, because Ukraine winning the war in Russia is really imperative for democracy in Western Europe. True. And global stability, I would argue.
Yeah, I want. Who else is spending or sending money to Ukraine?
Pretty much all of Western Europe. South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Germany and Poland have probably been the ones that have put the most out there, but France and England aren't too far behind.
All right.
Spain's been contributing a bit. I think Italy. I don't know how much Italy's doing. Some.
Effectively, we have a world war against Russia. Just via funding through the Ukraine. I mean, that's real. That's real. If we have the vast majority of the world sending money to Ukraine, I'm curious who is supporting Russia on the back end.
Iran, sort of, kind of. China, but not really.
I don't really. We don't need to dig into it. I was just posing the thought.
But yeah, it's really Russia is kind of on its own. They're getting a little bit of help from China. They're getting a fair bit of help from Iran. But Russia has very few friends. And the thing that's so stupid about this is, if Russia were to leave Ukraine tomorrow and just kind of give back Crimea that they took in 2014 or 2015 and leave and let Ukraine restore its borders, the world would move pretty quickly to forgive Russia.
End of story.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Russia is just they're pissing away so much wealth and global standing on Putin's quixotic quest to restore the USSR.
All right, next question here, and this is directed to the governor of North Dakota?
Yes.
All right, Doug Burgum. So the question is, how would you deter China as a president, Burgum?
So, I mean,
So the question is, how would you deter China as a president, Boswell?
Yeah, and it's I thought that was the most difficult question to answer in the debate, because like we have this odd relationship with China where we need them for a lot of things, but their behavior towards their own citizens and towards their regional neighbors like Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, the rest of the countries in Southeast Asia is really poor, and their record on human rights is abysmal. And so it's tough because we need to be able to call them out on the genocide that they're committing against the Uyghurs, and we need to call them out on their attempts to annex the South China Sea and their terrible record on the environment. But at the same time, they're a huge trading partner, and our economy depends so heavily on Chinese goods.
Yeah, I think very clearly.
And I get into this argument with some the captain of my pool team is this old dude from New York City, and he talks about how we're going to go to war with China, and I'm just like, no, we're not going to do that. China and the United States know that if there were ever to be like a full out war between U.S. and China, both would lose.
Yeah, I think that's very clear. Uh, the question is, we're already kind of both losing, and I actually feel like that we have outsourced so much of what's crucial to our daily lives to China that we already have lost the upper hand. Obviously, China depends on us as well,
They
but
do.
there's also the rest of the world that they can produce for in time. It's just right now we're their biggest customer. So, I mean, the consumerist mentality of the American hasn't spread to the rest of the world, but really, once you get a taste of ordering some shit on Amazon and getting it the next day, it's really tough to pass that up. So,
And Rosh says, when we say that we depend economically on China, when will morals prevail instead of self gain and interest? And the answer is you can't have everything. And like it's completely unfeasible for us to just say that we're going to be cutting economic ties with China because of their human rights record and all the other things that they're doing wrong. And so what we have to do is, I mean, I think China is by far the most complicated and difficult foreign policy question looming over the United States.
well, it would be nice to see the U.S. take back some industry, but I don't think that we can do that. I don't think we're in a place that we can do that. I don't
We
think
absolutely can.
we can afford to pay the wages. The cost of an iPhone goes from $1,000 to $25,000 really quickly when you account for
Right,
U.S. wages.
you've got workers in China that might be making like $100 a month or something, and to have the same kind of manufacturing quality done in the United States, you'd probably have to be paying those same workers like probably somewhere between like $5,000 and $8,000 a month.
I mean, if it was justified how much they were working, and for a lot, sometimes the skills that they bring to the table as well.
It's just American labor cannot compete on price against China. It just can't.
And then when you introduce unions and things like that, it just doesn't make sense here. So the next best solution would be that we take over a country and then just use them, for the production of our goods.
Well, that's kind of what happened in like the 1800s with the circles of influence in China.
Have to enlighten me.
Where like various European countries like just kind of established areas in China that they controlled, and so like they would use Chinese labor, and like they used opium to kind of suppress the population, because Chinese like they just pushed opium on the populace to keep them sedate and keep them working. But basically every Western European imperialist country had some sphere of influence in China, and there was kind of a gentleman's agreement among those countries that like, all right, we get this part, you get that part. We're not going to mess with you if you don't mess with us. And like the Chinese people suffered because it was like really just a step above slavery what they were doing.
Yeah.
And
opium dependency doesn't end well.
yeah, and so like part of what happened in like the early 1900s and like the Chinese Revolution with Mao was like him consolidating power and getting rid of Western influence in China. Now, there's a tremendous human cost to the Chinese Revolution that we're still seeing today, but like at this point, China has well overcome the barrier to like being independent. Where I don't know. Again, like going back to the United States versus China in a war, even if you're to get the entire rest of the world to fight against China in a war, nobody wins.
That's a tough question. I'd like to move on to the next couple questions because we got two more.
Like dealing with China is by far the most complicated task set forth upon any U.S. president. So, like that's a hard question to answer, and there's not really any good answer to it.
No, it's a very dangerous thing to deal with, really. All right, next question. The nation's report card was the weakest ever for American school children, exposing chronic absenteeism, deep declines for reading and math for 15-year-olds and 13-year-olds. But as president, would you have the responsibility to fix this as we see it? It's an interestingly phrased question.
Yeah, it's a weird question, but basically it's our schools suck right now. Why and how are you going to fix it?
Yeah. And what are your thoughts, James?
First thing that we need to do is increase funding for teachers. Nobody wants to teach right now because the job is thankless and the pay is terrible and the entry requirements are really high and expensive because you basically need a graduate degree to be able to teach. And in most fields, getting a grad degree, if you're working with a grad degree in practically any field besides teaching, you're making about double what you would if you were teaching. So there's not much incentive for people to become teachers. Teachers are treated terribly in this country. And the way you attract more talent and better talent to a field is increase pay. So that's the first step, is increase the number of teachers we have and pay them better. Second thing that we do is we increase we increase the standards by which we hold students to. And I saw this firsthand when I was teaching, that there were a number of students that I worked with that did not meet the standards for whatever grade they were in that would get passed on to the next. And I can tell you that even though I wasn't there the next year, I can practically guarantee that the student that didn't meet 7th grade standards, when it came to the end of 8th grade, damn near certain was not meeting 8th grade standards and probably got pushed into 9th grade. So we are graduating students that aren't meeting the standards. So we need to hold students to standards, and and when students don't meet the standards, they need to be held back and they need to be able to pass. They need to be there until they can pass the standards. We need accountability on the teacher side. We need accountability on the student side. We need funding for the teachers. And we need to, when it comes to curriculum development, this should be something that is done by a panel of a nonpartisan, apolitical panel of experts in their fields, not political appointments. And I'm saying that irrespective of whether they're Democrats or Republicans, is that curriculums and standards and tests should be designed by people with backgrounds in education and backgrounds in the fields in which those tests are on. So math, science, whatever. But we should not be having politicians writing curriculum. And that goes for Democrats or Republicans.
I don't necessarily know that we should be using people with a background in education. I think we need to be using the actual experts in those fields, not the people that have a background in education. Because
you need to have
oversight, both. The oversight needs to come from the experts in those fields, because that's where people.
I'm talking about curriculum design and testing. Is you need to have experts in the field so they can identify the key concepts, and then you need to have the people that are trained in education so that they can say, Because if you have like a
How do
quantum
we educate to that level?
right, because if you have a quantum physicist and you say, okay, what should kids know about quantum physics? Like, it's entirely
Well,
possible the quantum physicist is going to have a hard time
well,
figuring out what a
he's not
senior in high school can
sure.
reasonably know.
He's not going to create the education plan, but I think he needs to be setting the expectations of what needs to be known at certain education levels. I'm going to go ahead and give you
Right.
my answer.
I think you're
on
getting
this.
to the same point that I'm at, which
Yeah,
is you have experts in the field and you have experts in education. The two
well,
of them collaborate on a panel and
I'm
they
gonna
come up with a curriculum.
I'm going to give you my answer because it's a little bit different, and I think we're in the same vein here. But school choice is really big for a lot of people, and the reason is because a lot of schools suck. So a lot of people on the right really are pushing for school choice, which I grant them. Nobody wants their kid to go to a bad school, because.
Yeah, but school choice is a
But here,
proxy for religious schools.
well, but really, well, school choice is people don't want to go to shitty schools,
And that's fine.
But here's what I think needs to change in place of school choice. I think we need to be creating better schools, and what makes a
Yeah, but
bad
that's
school
easy.
what makes a bad school bad is that the funding comes from
The property
taxpayers,
taxes
from
in the area that it's located.
local taxpayers. So if you live in a poor area, you're going to get a poor education. Okay. If you live in a rich area, you're going to have access to more resources. So I think we really need to revisit the funding of schools, and that needs to be less localized and more federalized. Because if we're looking at education as a country, we need to be setting federal standards, and we have some federal standards in education, but
a lot.
but obviously, if you go to a poor neighborhood and look at the school, it's a shit school. If you go to a rich neighborhood and look at the school, it's a great school. At least the looks and the resource of the school.
Right. So if you were to do
go ahead. Sorry.
No, if you were to do a sort of redistribution of wealth of property taxes across the state to kind of normalize things a little bit and make it so that the spending per student is closer from the top to the bottom, then that would solve some problems. But that kind of goes in with like pay teachers more, is put more money towards things that are going to help students.
But here's the other issue though, and we talked about auditors and auditing earlier. There's a lot of money that gets spent that we don't know what happens to it, or it just goes completely. The money is spent so poorly in these very bureaucratic systems. So we really need an education redesign, which is what you were just talking about when you're talking about curriculum planning and things like that. The way that we educate our students in the United States is really, really antiquated. And
I will say that from my time in schools as a teacher, I actually didn't see very much waste at all. Now, if you look at and I'm going to use Texas as an example, but when you see like a high school in Texas building a football stadium that holds 20,000 people and costs $60 million, you think that money might have been better spent on the students and curriculum and stuff like that. So there are examples of waste in schools, but I think they're much more transparent and easily identifiable.
But that school also had 60 million spare bucks. So
yeah, but
and I guarantee the school can't be all that bad if they're putting in a $60 million stadium for the high school.
To me, that's wasteful. That's completely wasteful.
It would be wasteful. It was a shitty school, but I don't think you see shitty schools doing that. But I think we really need to redesign curriculums, redesign learning styles. We're not really redesigning learning. We're just turning blackboards and chalk.
Believe it or not, we have, because you'll see I don't know. I need to maybe we can do an episode on dumb questions that kids have had on tests or school. There was one I saw which was it was probably a second or third grade question of 6 plus 7. Write your answer and then show your work.
Okay.
6. How do you show your work?
Yeah. No, that's. But that's my point. Is we have this really antiquated system, and it's almost compounding on itself in terms of idiocracy, like giving first graders an hour's worth of homework every night, where really in first grade you don't need an hour's worth of homework.
You don't really need more than like 10 to 15 minutes of homework.
I mean, you don't. You don't really need homework at all. You're not learning anything that complex in school.
Yeah, probably not.
And at that point, it's more socializing. Same thing with like kindergarten. It's more social play and socializing than it is learning.
I mean, I would say like first grade is where you're going to be getting some very basic math. You're going to start learning how to read. So like there's important.
There's a little
things
bit, yeah. There's a little bit, but again, you're not getting that deep and that complex. But I think we need to.
We need to the next question.
Yeah, no, we only got a few minutes left, but I think we need a real redesign on our school systems. There's many aspects of the United States that have been picked up from other countries. We need somebody who's really going to get down and dirty and redesign the education system. And I just don't think it's just like when we talk about like welfare things and a lot of things just need, or public housing. These things need a lot of work because they're pretty shitty. And I don't think our education system is going in the right direction. Did you end up reading that Coddling of the American Mind book by Jonathan Haidt?
No.
That would be a great read. We talked about that one episode. I would advise you, if you got some time, pick that up or listen to the audiobook. All right, hit the next question. I got this window closed here.
All right, last question. 20 years ago, 70% of American adults said they were extremely proud to be an American. That number has plummeted to just 39%. In your closing statement tonight, please tell American voters why you're the person who can inspire this nation to a better day.
20 years ago, 70% of adults said they were proud to be an American. Now it's less than 40% are proud to be Americans.
Yes.
And we begin with Governor Burgum. Look, we've had a lot of division in this country. I hated Trump at first because I was super liberal at the time. I've grown not so much to hate Trump, but just really despise what he did to the country, and realize that it wasn't Trump. It was literally just about half the country, that wanted something like that. But the issue was he was super divisive. And now when you hear someone as a Trump supporter, if you're left-leaning, you hate them. And if you are left-leaning and you hear someone, if you're a Trump supporter, you hear somebody who's left-leaning, you hate them. And if you're left-leaning, you hear somebody who's a Trump supporter, you hate them. So it's making people, politics are making people hate each other. There used to be things that weren't talked about. Religion and politics were a big one. Were two of them. And now it's very public, and people develop an opinion based off you right away. And it's they don't even give you the time of day. So, I think that Trump had a lot to do with that. I don't think Biden has helped. I don't think he's as bad, but he hasn't mended the country. I
think he's done a little bit, but
I don't think he's done anything at all. At all. I listened to some of the speeches. I don't even understand what he's saying. And sure, maybe some of that's confirmation bias to a degree, or just mostly what you see in the news. But I don't see him doing anything competently at all. So we need a president that isn't going to be hardline Republican. Of course, this is coming from the Republican debate. That's going to be much closer to the center. And if you are a hardline Republican, you can hate that, but just understand that there's at least 50% of the population that completely disagrees with you. So you need someone that's going to be closer to the center.
I think in regards to why we've seen a decline in American pride in the last 20 years, first of all, if we measured 20 years back, that was pretty, like, if sometime in 2003, I'm going to assume that this was when the Iraq war had just started, but we were still pretty fresh off of 9/11. So there was still a considerable amount of national unity because of the shared tragedy that we had, and that really brought people together. And I think the Iraq War helped divide the country because we got to see tremendous amount of waste of lives and money on our part for something that didn't really seem worth it. And that division festered and multiplied. And when Obama was president, we got to see a portion of this country we got to see the racism of this country exposed a little bit more. And when Trump became president, the mask was really pulled off. And we've gotten to see just how racist this country really is to this day.
So,
and I think a lot of people are looking
you got to tie this up here.
I am tying this up.
All right.
I think that by looking at all these things that were there but hidden before, but now that we see, a lot of people are like, it's hard for me to have pride in a country that does all these things.
Well, I think the answer is we need somebody who's going to unify the country. And that means it can't be a hard left-winger. It can't be Bernie Sanders, and it can't be Donald Trump. It needs to be somebody much closer to the center. On that note, we're out of time. I want to thank you guys for joining. Remind you to subscribe on YouTube and any audio podcast platform. And we'll see you guys next time. Adios. This episode, I'm thankful it's over with. How about you? See you next time.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.